Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for coming out. I always really enjoy coming out to South Park Commons. There's always really good energy here and a bunch of smart people, some of whom I usually know, and I get to usually meet some new people too. So tonight I'm Charlie, and that's Nikhilesh, and we're just going to talk about two projects we've been working on. I'll start with just like who I am, since I don't know all of you. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is like the best city in the world, and then went to Harvard. And then my first job was at Amazon, and then I went to Facebook. I put the old Facebook logo because it was a long time ago that I worked there. And then I left after about a little less than 4 years to go start this company, Quora. Worked on that for about 4 years, and then I left and took some time off. And then I've been working on Expo and then this new project, Castle, since then. And so I'm going to talk about Expo, and then Nikki's going to demonstrate a little bit about what Castle is. So the genesis of what Expo is, if some of you might know what it is, some of you might not, is that one of the last things I worked on at Quora was I was managing the teams making our mobile apps. Because we had this website that was like people thought was cool and was sort of popular for the time, but I was on my phone all the time, and people were saying, hey, you should check Twitter less during meetings and stuff like that. And I just realized like this was becoming a big thing, that people were going to be on their phones all the time, and like people just want information on their phones all the time. And so we decided we should build like a native iOS app. So we got one of our best engineers, who was just like this grad student from Stanford who was really fast and had done some really good work before. And we got a designer who had Mac experience. And so she kind of knew the iOS aesthetic and like was really good visually. And we had a pretty good mobile website. So we just said, hey, take this mobile website and put some native scaffolding around it and just turn it into something that feels like a good app. Thought it would take like a couple of weeks. And then like 9 months later, we're submitting to the iOS App Store and negotiating with Apple to like get it in. It took like 2 or 3 weeks. This is a long time ago. And so after that, I was like, woo, that really took a long time. It was really painful for doing something not really complicated, just like wrapping our website in like a native tab bar. But at least Android, now we have that design. Now we have our web view sort of set up to connect with the outside world of native, et cetera, et cetera. That should go really fast and be really easy. And then, 10 months later, we have an iPhone or an Android app in the Play Store. And so that whole process was just sort of like, wow, that was crazy how long and laborious and how many steps of stupid that was, and how much it felt like traveling back in time to like the mid-90s before the web existed, whereas like the web was really great. And so after I left Quora, I was just I didn't really have a plan. I was just kind of sitting around, like running a lot, working out all the time, trying to think of ideas. And all the ideas I was thinking of were basically like stuff that had a pretty important mobile component. But the problem was that I was like, oh, but I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea. I don't want to spend 9 months building it. It's like an example is this thing I drew on this napkin, which was, I had this idea that like, I had a lot of friends and they'd want to catch up a lot of times. And then we'd sort of email back and forth and agree to meet somewhere for coffee or a beer. And then I'd drive 45 minutes and meet them, and somebody would be 10 minutes late, and then you'd hang out for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then you drive all the way back. And there's a huge amount of overhead to hang out a little bit with someone. So I thought, I'm driving around all the time doing errands and just killing my days, like Monday through Friday. What if I could like drive Aaron to the airport if he needed a ride? And I would make something like Uber, but it would be free, and I would be the only driver, and only my friends could request rides. And like, I thought it was like maybe genius, but also maybe totally stupid. And so if I could have built it in like a week, I would have been totally happy to spend that time and put the investment. But when I felt like, oh, it's going to take me 9 months or a year to make like a working version of this, and then that working version is going to be only working for people with iPhones, which is only like 70% of my friends, and it's going to be very brittle and hard to change, that starts to be like, man, like I might not even find out if this is genius, or I might just like cut at it wrong. So I need to shave the yak and like go down one level. So I just became really focused on like a better way to do development, because that's something I've always been interested in, just in working at Facebook and working at Quora. One thing I thought might be interesting in this group is just like how I found my co-founder. I basically made a list of all the people that I thought would be really good to work on this. And I started at the top, and the first guy was like, my wife just got tenure at UW, so I'm going to move to Seattle and focus on my family. And then the second guy was like, I just got promoted to vice president and reporting directly to Mark Zuckerberg. I don't want to jeopardize, I can't leave this company for 3 years. And then like basically no one wanted to do anything and work on it. So the last guy on my list was this guy I'd interviewed and not ended up working with, but had sort of thought he was smart when I interviewed him. And so I asked to have lunch with him, and I talked to him about the idea, and I said, hey, do you want to work on this? And he said, all right. And he just quit his job and we started working on it. We didn't really know each other, and it worked out really good. And this is James. So I don't know what the moral of the story is, but I would say like you kind of have to trust your gut, and it's hard to know when you're going to sort of click with someone and work on something well. So I sort of mentioned Expo a bunch of times, but like, what is it? So just to give you some sort of concrete idea, like this is what a Hello World app looks like in Expo. Like it's longer than I'd like it to be, but you can see it's pretty short. It's just JavaScript, and it sort of produces a Hello World. I can show you a little more concretely. We've made a tool called Snack that's kind of like the JS Fiddle or something. And so since Expo works on iOS, Android, and web, I can do like a little web player in the browser. And here's the Hello World app I can show you on the web. And it'll update here. Maybe it's hard to see for people in the back, but and then if I change this to sort of Hello South Park Commons, then 3 or 4 seconds later, this should update and say Hello South Park Commons. Cool. And then you can do more elaborate things with assets and other things like that. And the other cool thing is you can do development on the device. So I have the Expo client app I got from the App Store here, and I can just scan this QR code with my camera on my phone and hit open in Expo, and then it'll open this thing, and this is sort of our default template, which is a little bit more elaborate than a like Hello World app, and I can say like hi SPC, and now like this text will change on my phone to hi SPC, and I can iterate and develop really, really quickly on the device, on iPhone and on Android. That's really, really important when you start to get into peripheral stuff and things like that, because if you've ever done development on the iOS simulator or stuff like that, dealing with like, if you're just doing like visual stuff on the screen using views and text, that's fine. But as soon as you start to do stuff with the camera or video or any kind of like anything except the totally vanilla basic stuff, it just doesn't really provide a good simulation of the actual device. And so it's really important to be able to develop on the device if you want to iterate quickly. So anyway, back to the presentation. So one way to talk about it is like sort of Rails for the mobile front end, where Rails I think did a really good job of just being this sort of coherent, well thought out thing that had a bunch of sane defaults that if you use those, everything in it would kind of work well together and you wouldn't have to worry about too much, and you could focus on sort of the essential complexity of whatever you're trying to build, and the system would kind of take care of all the details, et cetera. But then you could kind of customize things as you grew and needed and stuff like that. So that's kind of one way we think about what we do. Concretely, the idea is like one React code base gives you an app that works on web, iOS, and Android. Originally we started with just iOS and Android, but we found a lot of people were telling us that they had the same people developing the React website as were developing their iOS and Android code base, and they just wanted to share as much code as possible. So we ended up just deciding we were going to target all 3 platforms. It feels great on each one of those platforms. You get 100s across the board on Lighthouse scores for web. On iOS and Android, it uses sort of the native operating system widgets. It uses React Native under the hood, so that's where it comes from. And like the way React Native works is like when you put a view, it uses like a UI view on iOS and like an Android view on Android. And if you put a scroll view or a slider or things like that, it uses the operating system widgets. So all those things feel right. And the other thing that's really, really important is like one alternative that people have tried to use is just use the web for this kind of stuff. And the thing that really gets people stuck there is that sort of gestures and animations just don't feel really good when you use the web or HTML5 to render your sort of native applications. And so one thing that's really good about this technology is that your sort of transitions, animations, gestures are really like native. They are native, and so they're native feeling. You can write native code if you need to, like Swift, Objective-C, Java, or Kotlin. You can kind of break out of the system and do that if you need to. And on the web version, you obviously you can write raw HTML, JS. Most people are pretty happy with React and don't need to do that very much on the web, but you can if you need to. And then we just have like, over the last couple of years, we've built up like 75 plus of like the most commonly used APIs that kind of cover almost all the ground that like any normal app needs. So maps, camera, video playing, blur view, the accelerometer, pretty much access to every different peripheral and sensor on your phone. And then we have a couple of proprietary things like Amplitude Analytics, so we've been moving away from proprietary things. Ways to log in with Google, Facebook, OAuth, the new Apple login thing that's going to be required on some iOS apps is going to be supported in the next version of Expo. Background location. One cool thing about having background location now is that I can finally build that Cheever app that I was talking about. That was kind of the final missing piece of the puzzle. And then we have like a GL view for doing complex graphics things, SQLite for doing complex storage, secure store, random byte photography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We spent a long time building this standard library, and it all kind of works together. And we thought we just discovered that was really, really important in terms of making something like actually usable instead of just sort of theoretically usable. Because if you think about like a programming language. A lot of times people make new programming languages but not have a standard library, and then you can't really use them to write any useful programs. You can just sort of write them to make toy things that add two numbers together and then print it out at the console or something like that. So you really need a whole bunch of APIs to do the things that people actually want to do. And it's also really a big boon to people when they all work together in concert and they're all tested against each other, and there aren't sort of like binary conflicts when you're trying to install different pieces of native software or weird different APIs that you're not familiar with. Like, we put a lot of work into making sure that the APIs feel pretty consistent across all these things and are well tested against each other. We also take care of like builds for you. So you don't need Xcode or Android Studio or any of that stuff unless you want to write custom native code. And you can use like a cool side effect of this is you can use Windows and Linux to build iPhone apps. It's actually a lot of our users are people who don't have a Mac but need to build some sort of native iOS app or something like that. We also provide like instant over-the-air updates. Because you're just writing JavaScript in a typical Expo app, we can actually send fresh JavaScript down over the air to the binary on users' devices. And so if you have a bug or you're running a sale or you need some very minor change to your app that doesn't really need to go through App Store review, you can send the new code down and you can choose the policy for updating. Like the default one is kind of the way that like the Chrome or Spotify desktop apps have, where it like downloads in the background and the next time the user opens it, they get the new copy. But you could choose to have the app restart or wait to download or whatever you wanted to do. So that's one of the things that like a lot of the people who use Expo really, really like and really appreciate, because they're able to like iterate without having to go through this laborious build, submit process. And then every day we basically have millions of people using apps built with Expo and tens of thousands of people developing stuff with it. It's hard to, because it's like an open source project, it's hard to know exactly these numbers, but we know it's at least tens of millions and millions and tens of thousands. Here's some stuff people have been saying about it from just like the last week. I grabbed these from Twitter. I can't say enough good things about Expo. Absolutely wonderful developer experience and a very small list of technologies. Rails, Meteor, Create, React App, Tachyons that make me feel smarter, not dumber. That was some guy who used to work at Airbnb and I think has a lot of clout in certain sections of the community, so that was cool. And then this guy just posted, I just built an app with a team of just 2 engineers, only one person handling the front end with Expo and the power of React Native for an NGO here in India, launched in under 10 days, and today we're trending in the Google Play Store. Like, what power these tools have, such amazing, just wow. Like, I think he forgot to post like a cat meme or something at the end of that. But I think that's kind of what we were going for, is just trying to like make it so that like when you imagine something in your head, bam, magically it's in front of you, instead of this like, oh, it's now this long, laborious process, I need to hire someone, et cetera, et cetera. So these things feel really great to us. We've got some really cool companies using it. Brex, which I think raised money at like $2.6 billion and is doing really well and has like a customer service center right next door to here. Their whole app is built with Expo. Flexport, which just raised money like $3 billion. Their whole app uses Expo, and they wrote a really nice blog post about it a few weeks ago. So if you're interested in that, like on flexport.engineering, they have a whole blog post. It's the most recent one right now. This app called Cameo, which is like kind of hilarious, where you can book like B+ and some A- celebrities and some C+ celebrities to like give a shout out to your mom if they're a fan or something like that. And they'll record a 30-second video for you and send it to you. So they actually use this thing where they break out and write their own native code, because they need to have some special stuff with the recording and playing of videos and some of the ways that they modify them and things like that. But the sort of main parts of their UI that are sort of like normal tabs and transitions and stuff like that, that's all done in Expo, and they make it work on both platforms that way. Valve uses it for the new Steam Chat app. We're actually not, I don't think it's like the best app in the world, and so we actually are trying to help them make it better. But it's like, it's not really a technology's fault, it's just like they haven't put enough time into it yet. But Valve is like, I think I always admire their games and like some of the things that they talk about and the way that they do things. So that was really cool for me personally. And then this is an app I just wanted to sort of show, Codecademy Go. Like, if this video just kind of shows like the slick transitions in the animations. Like, this app has 4.8 stars in the App Store, and it's like, every couple of weeks, it seems like the iOS App Store features it, because it just is a really good, slick, smooth feeling app. And like, if you want to just sort of say like, oh, can this technology make something that feels, you know, really, really good, or should I write it in Swift or something like that? This is like a pretty good example of like, if you do something well with the technology, what it looks like. I'll show that video again because I think it's really slick. Just the way that the background transitions when you scroll down, and then like these transitions are pretty smooth here, like when you slide. There's little animations like that. Anyway. A whole bunch of others, like the Spike Ball game. That company is now using. They sent us a free Spike Ball set. Cisco that like probably provides the cups in your dining hall in college. Bitfinex, like a bunch of Bitcoin things, including Bitfinex. The Thai Royal Police have like a thing you can report crimes on. There's actually like a lot of users in Southeast Asia because I mentioned how like the reason we think that we're super popular in Southeast Asia is because I mentioned how you can write iPhone apps on a Windows machine, and I think that a lot of people have iPhones there, but it's hard to get Macs. That's my theory at least. Stanford Daily Newspaper and Urban Dictionary. A bunch more too, but those are just sort of a cross-section of highlights. So you should use it because it's really good, and we keep working on it and making it better all the time. A couple of caveats, like things that you might not want to use it for. If you're writing like a real-time game, it's not optimized for that. It's more optimized for like making applications, and you're probably better off using Unity or Love2D or something like that. If you have something very multimedia heavy, like if you were trying to make like one of those Shmuel apps that does like karaoke, like on the fly sound editing and stuff like that, you probably just need to write a lot of C++ code to do that, and it's probably not that helpful. And if you have like an iOS team or an Android team like already in place, or just like an expert like that's really, really comfortable doing something, it's probably like the switching costs might not be worth it. The other, like a similar thing is like if you have an existing code base that you need to work from. Like one thing that happened sort of in the broader React Native community is like Airbnb made this big public investment in React Native, but they had already an iOS app and an Android app, and so they sort of grafted React Native onto that and sort of trying to like it's called in the community like brownfield app, where you have like your native code interacting with your JavaScript runtime, and like half of your stuff is in JS and half of your stuff is in native code. And so then when you have like client state, you're not really sure where the source of truth is, and you sort of have to mirror it in both places, and that becomes awkward in a bunch of ways. That usually doesn't end up working out that well. Like you can make it work, but it's just like it ends up being sort of more work than the savings you get from the fast iteration and cross-platform things and stuff like that. So if you have if you're already somewhere, you don't want to throw away your code base, I would say like just keep doing what you're doing. There's also a sort of similar competing technology from Google called Flutter that has some nice properties, and if you really want to use that, that's like a pretty reasonable choice. Some people think HTML5 is good enough for them, and like that's fine. You're probably wrong, because users over and over again, we've seen startups tell us like, we tried to launch an HTML5 thing, but we got really bad like metrics of engagement and stuff like that, so we had to go back to doing some sort of native solution, because users just like consciously or not just like kind of demand, I think especially on phones, when they're touching, they really want like really good gesture and animation feel. Anyway, so that's just the pitch for why you should use this stuff. But here's just like some challenges I thought I'd talk about, like building a company in this space that might be interesting to some of you. A big thing is just like adoption and growth. Like my previous experience was like working at Quora, where like the most important thing for our growth there was like basically sending emails to people on Tuesdays and doing SEO. And like there were a bunch of other things, but those are like the two main things. And then working at Facebook, it was basically like harvesting people's email address books and then spamming all their friends. And also just that people liked getting on Facebook and would tell people about it. So we tried a bunch of different things to grow this product. One of them was like Jason and I decided we would go to 30 companies in 30 days and pitch them on using this thing. And so we called it 30 under 30 because it was cute. And so we went and we did this. We met a bunch of people around here. We met a bunch of other companies, and we basically got 0 companies using Expo doing this. And the biggest takeaway from that was just like, for something that's like a developer tool, you really just have like one moment where you catch people making a choice about, I mean, maybe they are unhappy with their choice and they're going to revisit or something like that. But in general, people start making something, using something, and then they make a big investment in it, and it's really, really hard to change that. So if you don't catch someone at the beginning of the time when they're making an app, it's just kind of like not going to happen. And a good example of this is one of my friends is an engineering director at Lyft, and we were having beers, and I was telling him about what I was working on, and he was like, that sounds really like a great fit for this thing I want to do. I want to run a bunch of A/B tests for driver sign up. I think this could really help us iterate faster and also just be lighter weight. We're worried about apps binary size. A bunch of things sound really great about this. Why don't you come in and talk to our engineering team? So a couple of us from the engineering team like went in and to talk to these people, and they had an iOS team and an Android team already in place. And basically all the iOS people were like, we don't want anything to do with JavaScript. We think it's a bad language. End of discussion. Like we don't, and I think the way I would frame that is like, there's that Upton Sinclair quote that's kind of like, it's very hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And so I think people are like used to getting treated really well because iOS devs are like at a premium. they have like a special place in a company and things like that. It's just like hard to get them to want to do something different when they're pretty happy with the way things are. Android devs are usually more open to it because the way a lot of companies work is you build your iOS app and then you say, hey, Android people, just copy whatever they did, or you farm it out to India or Eastern Europe or something like that. So I don't know, that was interesting. So that didn't really work. That like talking to like companies who were already doing stuff we realized it was kind of too late. So one thing that we did was a good and bad thing is that the way we originally built the product is that James and I actually sat down and built this whole. We started looking into HTML5 to build this technology, and we found out that didn't really satisfy us. So we looked into using native views controlled by JavaScript. That was our next idea. We started to be really happy with the results, and we built our whole own runtime. We called it Ion.js, and we had it open source, and we were using it to build an app that we were playing around with. And then we were refining it, but then Facebook announced this React Native technology, and we realized we had 2 people working on our thing, and they had 20 plus people working on React Native, and they had made this big announcement. There was a lot of community excitement, and so we were kind of like, instead of trying to compete with this, why don't we just take their open source stuff and build all the stuff that they're not doing right or are neglecting around it, and take that. And so there's a good and a bad from that, and I'll talk more about that in time. But React Native is sort of the basis for a lot of the pieces of Expo. And so when we were wanting to grow, we sort of said, hey, a lot of people know what React Native is and interested in that, and they just don't know about how much easier it would be if they were using our stuff. So we basically went to Facebook and said, hey, what would it take to like get Expo into the docs and have people learn about that? And one of the open source directors there kind of gave me a list of requirements, like you can't lock people into Expo in any way. You can't be talking to your servers. You can't be, and they give us a whole list of things. And so then we said, okay, great. And then we basically went off and built something like called Create React Native App, which is very similar in spirit to something called Create React App, which is popular. And then we basically said, hey, let's write a blog post together about how we worked on this together, even though we did all the work. But if it'll get us into the docs for this thing that's like more well-known right now, that'll really help us. And then that actually just like immediately, we just started getting like 1,000 people a day like checking us out, and that started to really help us take off. So that was an important thing to do, and just like leaning into riding someone else's wave, I think, is a really good way to grow any product. But what that means for any different thing can be different. Another thing that worked kind of well for us was going around to college hackathons, because we had an intern who was like one of the directors of CalHacks, and so he was pretty good at getting me speaking slots at these hackathons, and I would give some sort of talk, and then the last third I would just pitch using Expo to all the kids, and actually it's a really good fit for building something in a 48-hour period. So we have like a whole generation of college students that this is sort of the way that they know how to make apps, and I think the last time I went to Penn Apps, I think 7 out of the top 10 winners had some component of their project that was like an Expo app, just to be a phone interface. And so now we sort of see a lot of startups now that are staffed with people who came out of college and learned how to make an app that way. That's sort of paying off like 2 years later. And so one sort of thing that I just talked about a little bit was sort of how like building on top of someone else's library like meant that we didn't have to do all this infrastructure work of like building this runtime, and we can rely on like this whole big, pretty talented group of engineers at Facebook who are doing that and battle testing it on their own, big blue app and other stuff. But there's also like a bunch of downsides of that, where there's a bunch of things where like I wish stuff was different, and it's really hard to change because people come to Expo, some of them expecting to be able to use React Native that they read about and are familiar with that's separate from what we do, and so we kind of have to service them, and when new features come to React Native, we kind of just have to deal with them however they come out, and we're tied to their release cycle a little bit, and when they make incompatibilities, it really causes frustrations for our users and things like that. So like one thing I really think should happen with this kind of development directionally is it should be a lot more like the web, where like one really important there's a bunch of ways that I think that, but the most important one I think is that like if I go to some website I made when I was in high school, like in the 90s, with a version of Chrome from today, it works pretty much just fine. Like maybe the marquee tag and the blink tag don't work, but like basically everything else just works the way it did in like 1997. And there's just a sort of infinite backwards compatibility that means that as a developer, you don't have to worry about like the advancing of the web unless you want to use some new piece of technology. And whereas like a lot of other things like the way Flutter works, the way React Native works and stuff like that is more like people are like, oh, I have a way to improve the API of the runtime. We can just make this runtime better. Let's make a new version. And since we're the only ones using it, or we're the only ones we care about, like, it doesn't matter if we have breaking changes because we can change all the application code. And so then, like, one of the big frustrations that we find, especially with kids at hackathons, is they'll find some question and answer on Stack Overflow that has like an example of code from 9 months ago that doesn't work anymore because the interface has changed with the new version of React Native and stuff like that. So the way that we solve that in Expo is we jam like 5 versions or sometimes more or less into our binary so you can run old versions, and it helps a lot, but it doesn't completely solve the problem. But the highest level of frustration here that I think is a bad part of riding someone else's wave is like you can't fix these kinds of things when they're baked into the technology you're using, or at least it's hard to. And so then one kind of lesson I learned that was interesting was like working at Facebook, there was kind of this idea of like everyone is kind of the same. Like, at least in the time that I worked there, no one really slotted users into like, oh, these are high content producer people or important people, and these are like low value users or something like that. And I think there were a lot of good things about that, where like it sort of meant like every user is kind of important, and kind of every person is kind of the same. Like we all have families, and we all like have something to say, but we don't all need to know something in the world. And you can kind of see that reflected in the way that Facebook works as a product, where it's like very focused on like you connecting with like your friends around you and your family and stuff like that, as opposed to something like Twitter or Instagram that's much more focused on like, if you're famous, you can reach millions of people or broadcast everyone and things like that. Facebook now kind of does everything, but like the thing that's good at, I think, is more about your family. Whereas at Expo, I think we had to really like have one thing that really helped us like focus when we were having some trouble with some other things was just saying, hey, wait, like let's figure out who the most important people are who are using this, and then really focus on their needs. So we started working really closely with Brex and Flexport and like 10 other people that we thought were doing interesting things and had smart engineers and money to spend and would be a good brand name that I could put in a talk like this and make people impressed. And like, we had like 5 or 6 criteria, and we started prioritizing those people and working with the smart people who were like leading us to what they needed, and we thought that those would lead to other things. It was really good to just be able to focus on those things and tier our users. Another thing that's really frustrating when working in the mobile space is just like the way that Apple, especially, and to some extent Google, just like control the platforms and the ecosystem around there. So like I showed you how the Expo works, where you download this client from the App Store and like you scan a code and do those things, and like every time we submit it, there's like probably a 1 in 5 chance that they'll cryptically tell us some reason that it's wrong and that they're going to take our app out of the App Store or not allow it or whatever. And they'll, at various intervals, Apple has asked us to like remove certain features that we don't understand why necessarily. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we just have no idea why they want us to remove something from the app or do something a different way. And there are a lot of things that we could make better if we were just able to do everything we can do technically, if we were just able to stick that in and get that in people's hands. And so that's really, really frustrating. And then there's also just stuff that, like Google's in general, like way more laissez-faire and better, and I think has this like web DNA, but at the same time, it's not like 100% better. So one example is there was something where, I mentioned how we have some proprietary APIs that we put into Expo as like a convenience thing. And so part of the Expo library has some branch code in it, which is like this analytics thing a lot of people asked us to include because they wanted to use it. And then I think one day Google decided that like the older versions of branch, if you hadn't asked explicit permission from the user, there was something wrong with that, and they decided to mass ban every app using an older version of the branch SDK from the App Store. And since the Expo library included this, basically all of our users on Android were using this, and fortunately they didn't like actually end up banning all of them, but like haphazardly like hundreds of these apps got banned, and a lot of them weren't using branch. They just happened to get that included as part of our library. So we had to basically like have an all hands on deck scramble to work with all these people to get their stuff resubmitted and remove that code and rebuild it and do a lot of stuff for them. And just like the fact that you're really dependent on Apple and Google for distribution of software, and they're not very careful about the decisions they make, and they don't explain themselves, and they don't really have any accountability, and they don't really care if people are having a hard time developing stuff or not. It just makes it really tough. It also makes it tough in that like a lot of interesting things you could do business-wise, like insert yourself into ad flow or payment flow or things like that, like they kind of have sort of staked out that territory and said, hey, we want our pound of flesh here, and we don't want anyone else to take any cut. So that's makes it tricky. In general, I think developer is like a just like a pretty tough space to monetize. There's a bunch of reasons for that. I'm probably still learning them as we go, but like some of them are that like there's a bunch of, in the general development space of applications, there's a lot of platform players that have strategic reasons they want to subsidize stuff. So if you look at it, there's like Xcode is free, Android Studio is free, React is free, VS Code is free, like tons and tons of things are free. And some of that is like strategic, done by big companies because they want people to build on their platform and they want things to happen a certain way. And some of it's just developers also like to produce free things and they think stuff should be free. And I feel that internally and kind of agree with it. And so there's just tons of open source stuff out there. So you have to make something really, really good to stand out and make it be paid. And then also like if you don't make something free and open source, it's really, really hard to build a community. Like one of the things that works and makes Expo work well is that we have like a really active forums, and like we try to answer all the hard questions on there, but we've gotten users to answer each other on there, and there's this huge body of knowledge that's been built up, plus stuff on Stack Overflow and on Reddit and other stuff. And without that, if it wasn't like a free open source thing that like we got as wide reach as possible on, it would be hard to build that. And so it's like, if you don't make your stuff free and you don't make it open source, it's like, how do you make it popular enough that it's like a real thing? But then if it's free and open source, how do you make any money off it? And our answer to that has basically just been services, because we found that people really want to like do different builds for testing and for submitting to App Store and things like that. And they want, and like, it's really hard for them to do and stuff like that, especially if they're not used to doing it because they haven't had to deal with it. And then also the over-the-air updates is a really big thing for them, where they want to push out updates all the time and do it themselves. We have ways that you can do it yourself and host it yourself and everything. That's part of our philosophy, is to make it so that you can do everything yourself, but we'll take care of stuff if you want to. So we're adding these paid services around builds and over-there services, and we provide notification services for free, but that's kind of a baseline because zero push. There's somebody provides free push notifications, and so it's basically like there's no way to charge people for that in a reasonable way. But it's hard, it's pretty hard to make money on developer services. That gets me into fundraising too, where like we basically are self-funded right so far for the most part, which has been really good for a bunch of things, where we're able to just carve our own path and not stress about things too much. And like, since this takes a long time, it's good. But it is interesting that like when I talk to my friends who are VCs and stuff like that, they're like, really interested, you have an awesome team, I'm excited about what you're doing, it seems like it's going great. But like, we don't really want to ever invest in developer tools because they never work out well. They never have good exits. I can't think of any, like the best case scenario is like Unity is like maybe $1 billion company after like 20 years of work, and that's like the best case scenario. Whereas if like, you're in the corporate credit card space, maybe it takes you 6 months to get there or something like that. And so like not a lot of people are really excited about it. And I don't really have advice except like one thing that makes our life easier in some ways is we have almost no independent competition except from these big companies that have strategic regions, because like it's really, really hard to play in this space, and like it's just like a long-term grind and things like that. One thing that's been good for us is that I think almost all the people who work on this are basically, we work on it because we just like want to solve these problems and we like doing this stuff. And that like whenever we've hit like hard times where Apple's threatening to take us out of the App Store, or it feels like we're frustrated with one thing or another, just the fact that it's like, well, we're lucky that we can do this and we want to do this, and this is like stuff we would do for free and open source anyway, is a really powerful thing to be able to fall back on. I don't know, that's like leads into building a team. We have about 15 people working on it right now. I would say like it's really hard to hire great people in the Bay Area because there's a lot of pressure from big companies who are making big offers to people, and there's a lot of access to capital if you want to do a startup and things like that. So some of our team is here and we have some awesome people here, but a lot of the people, we've ended up just like finding remote people who are really great, and that's sort of just like what I think a lot of modern teams would have to do. Whereas like 10 years ago, I would have sort of said, no, that just doesn't seem reasonable. And I think it's worse. Like, I really think it's way better talking to people in person. And like, there's just a level of in sync that you get when you like go to lunch together and you like talk about little random ideas that you're not sure about, but you're kind of like. And I noticed like one of our most important people like lives in Vancouver, and he often comes back. He'll come into Palo Alto and visit every couple of weeks, and he'll often say like, "Wait, what? We're doing that? What are you talking about?" And I feel like I talk to him every day on Slack and on video and stuff like that, but it's like somehow there's these little things that like we are talking about in person that like don't make it into those conversations. So I don't have a real answer to this, except that I feel like it's basically impossible to hire good enough people to do something hard like this. without going into remote or having, like Google or Facebook type revenues. But at the same time, it's also hard to work remotely with people. So I'd rather just do it and use Slack and Zoom to the best of our ability, but it is hard. I mentioned how it's open source. One thing we struggled with is like when to accept contributions from people. Like sometimes we'll have people say, oh, I want to add this thing, and then they'll not do a great job like with a PR or something like that. And then we have this awkward situation where we have like someone who's like really likes what we're doing and is excited about it, and we have to sort of say like, no, like go away, or like don't do that or something. Or we have to spend tons and tons of our time like working with them. And so like we've sort of settled on something where we like have written more guidelines about how to engage with us and talk to us before you spend a lot of time making something. And sometimes we'll just do stuff for people and things like that. But it's a really hard thing to balance, like getting really good open source work from a community with like trying to produce something that's like consistent and coherent and like above a certain quality threshold. It's like it's really hard to get. Sometimes people say like about college or something like friends, work, sleep, like choose two. I think there's some sort of similar analogous thing going on here where you like can't check all the boxes you want to because there's a lot of tension in getting really good open source work out of people. But if you don't get open source work at all, then you're like missing out on stuff. Another thing that's just hard is like there's some really long feedback loops involved in this. Like if you think about like one of my favorite programming languages is Python, and that was like, I think Guido started building that in like 1989 or 90, and then first released it in like 91, and then it started to become pretty popular in like 2004, and then really hit another level of popularity as like big data and machine learning and become a big thing now. And that's like a 30-year journey for that language. And I also talked about how like companies and projects, like they kind of make a choice when they start using something, and then they're kind of stuck on that for a long time. And this is true of a lot of technologies. Like looking around, like you can kind of see like somewhere around like 2008, 2009, companies just started using AWS. But companies like Facebook before that, or like anything that was kind of around before that, they kind of have their own hosting, and they're like locked into that because they just kind of started doing something a certain way, and it worked for them, and they kept going. And so even if you have a really good solution that makes sense for most people, there's just a really high switching cost to like deep investment technologies. And so I think this just takes like a lot of patience and like has like a really long cycle. I think there's also something where like probably one of the knocks that people have had on Expo is that it used to, like for a while we didn't have all those 75 APIs that I talked about, and you couldn't build everything you want to, and we didn't have enough support for like letting you write your own native code and do every little thing that you want to in a custom way. We're still getting all the way there, but we're like in a pretty good spot now. And so we like had some people try it and sort of say, oh, like this is a really good thing if you're in a hurry or you want to get started quickly or whatever, but if you want to make something really serious, you have to like go down to the metal or like use the React Native library on your own, or build stuff in Swift or whatever. It's not good enough for real work. And like somebody checks that out and they may not revisit that assumption for 2 years. We actually had someone write into us something nice and say basically like, oh, I had heard this and I had tried it and I thought this, and then I finally revisited it, and you guys have done so much work in the last like year and a half. It's totally different now, but it like took me a long time to revisit. And like, so there's just something where we'll do really good work and then we'll sort of hear about it paying off 9 months later or something like that. And that's a lot less fun than when you like can roll out something and then do an A/B test and find out about it the next day. And like the last thing that I think is like can be frustrating is like I talked about how we have millions of people using Expo apps every day, but like they kind of don't know it. And that's like really different from like working on Quora, or working on Facebook, or working on Amazon, where like all those companies I had like some sense where I could go home for Christmas and people were like, oh, you work on that. Like I buy stuff from there, I use that, or I like think I saw that in a search result or something, or had to sign up and I didn't want to. And so one thing that we always wanted to do with Expo, and still kind of do, is like build sort of like a new browser where like in the same way that like a lot of the software used on your desktop is like use Chrome, and you like know it, like kind of everybody knows what it is, and it's like the way that you access stuff, and it has sort of like rules and relationships between things, and it's part of the whole equation that end user uses. And then like you can build a network of things where you can like link between things and bounce between them and stuff like that. And there's no technical reason we can't do that with this technology, where we could make like a network of experiences that were all like had awesome gestures and animations and felt really good and awesome and stuff like that, except that like basically Apple doesn't really want it to exist. And like there's nothing you can really do about that in the short term. And so that is what it is, and it's hard. But that's something that's been on our minds, and a lot of people on the team are interested in that. And then we also sort of found that a bunch of people were building video games with Expo, even though it's not really that good for that. And then we were looking around and kind of saying like, hey, like all of us pretty much learned to program because we liked playing video games and wanted to make them. And that's like, I think there's like different ways that people find programming, but we ended up on our team with like a bunch of people who had like this same story of kind of like, oh, I just like really like this game, and like somebody told me to make a game, I could just learn programming and then I could do it on my calculator or on my computer or whatever. And so like then Nikhilesh on our team ended up just like building some stuff for taking a lot of the concepts of this, but just building sort of a new way to make video games. And then we started having a couple other people helping with it, and we ended up making this thing called Castle that has a lot of spiritual similarities to Expo, but also is just like freed of a lot of the constraints and is really focused on like just fun, entertaining game stuff. And so he's gonna talk about that and show you sort of a demo. This is him and this is him. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be talking about Castle today, which is a project, the heart of which sort of started maybe like a year and a half ago, and then it slowly started becoming this very concrete product that then pulled away from Expo to become its own thing. And then there's like a few people working on it right now, including me, and Charlie's working on it too. And the idea has been to like push further and further into the platform ecosystem aspects of, having a bunch of interactive media on a platform that can all interact with each other. And it seems to be that the game space is a great place for that. So I could, do a bunch of slides and like sort of talk to you about the abstract aspects of Castle, but I was like, I'll just, just do a demo and like go through some concrete examples that slowly introduce aspects, like platform aspects one by one. So Castle right now has a desktop client, and that's what we are mainly working on, but it does also work on mobile. Actually, the mobile prototype that I have does use Expo for the UI, so it's great to have Expo. And the game engine is actually based on Lua, just for various reasons. There's like very good game technology with Lua, and it's like high performance and stuff. So that's what you'll be seeing on desktop, and that's how it runs on mobile too. The desktop app is this like fun mix of actually web coding and Lua for the game. So we'll just check it out. Anyway, so the first game, actually, let me talk a little bit about Castle's UI now that I'm here. So we're going to be like working through a lot of different ways of laying out the UI. But right now, you can see a bunch of the games that are in Castle on the home screen. And you can go into the all games view and just see all of the stuff people have made. And back on the home screen, there's like also posts by people, which is like when a certain thing happens in a game that they thought was cool and they want to share with people, they can like post out of it. And these posts can also attach data that you can actually load back into the game. So you can make a game like Minecraft and make a level and then post the level and then have people load the level. And so we'll see fun stuff like that soon. And then we're also working with getting like chat in there, so you can like talk to people and you can actually like share a post, and you can do all of this like really fun network stuff. So let's start simple though. So the first game I'm going to show you guys is called Robo Squash. This one's made by Jason, who's sitting back there. And it covers the basics of like what is involved in a game technology-wise. Like, okay, you have graphics, real-time graphics, and then you have input, which is me like moving the mouse around and clicking. And there is sound. I don't know if it's going to come out of here. Yeah, this was like a really old, like this is actually one of the first games that has been on Castle. But yeah, we haven't really broken old stuff, and that's one of the things we're holding ourselves to, is like not break APIs as we go. So it still works. And already you can actually see one little network aspect, which is every game has a chat thing, and you can chat with other people that are playing this game. This one's a single player game, so it doesn't like, it's mostly about talking about the game really. And this is Robo Squash, and like not much platform stuff going here. So I'll just like back out of it and like show you a different game that actually has the first platform aspect, which is real-time multiplayer. So this game is called Riters, and it's been made by Paul, who is one of the creators on Castle. And they have like a little intro sequence going on, connecting to the grid. All right, so let me see if someone else joins in with me. I told Jason, I gave Jason a tip before to do that. So I'll just hit space, over here and join in. And it's like a Tron-like. You can see it's got all of these like fun glowy effects going on and like feels sort of retro and stuff. Paul does a lot of retro stuff like that. Actually, on top, you can see it says Nikki, which is me, and it says Nikki has the blue lines here. And it's actually rendering my avatar, but with a lot of glow, so you can't actually see the avatar. But I can actually go into the settings and like change the glow amount. So there's actually a user interface API too that games can use, which will put the user interface that they create like as part of Castle's like surrounding UI. So I can turn off the shader and stuff, and you can see what my avatar looks like. But I like the shaders, so I'm gonna put it back in there. Jason, are you? Oh yeah, I'll send you the session. What's up? Oh, you're playing a different session? All right. No, that's okay. But yeah, so this is, oh yeah, Jason's here with me right now, and he's got the red line. There he is. So the idea is to, maybe not do what I'm about to do right now, or maybe not do it. Okay, there we go. Just crashed into myself. Anyway, so yeah, it's a multiplayer game, and it turns out that was actually like quite a technical challenge just to get all of this like real-time messaging going on. And the nice thing is because we own the native runtime and it's Lua based, like we're giving it UDP and all of that. Like you don't have to like work over WebSockets or something like that. Like you have like sort of raw network sockets over here, and the game does like client-side prediction and things. So I already talked about the UI on the left, and another thing is that actually this author is using a library created by another author that gives the game this style. And so people are already making libraries for Castle that they put on GitHub and that other people can load. I'm gonna stop just like losing over and over here and start showing you the next thing that I wanted to show. So far we've seen some platform aspects, which is just the game by itself with a little bit of chat on the side. Multiplayer game, also the use of libraries by one person that another person uses. So that's a little bit of like, network interaction going on. The next one I'm going to show you is called Verticube, and this one's a bit more recent, and it's pretty exciting. It's actually in 3D. You guys will get to see more of the code API itself soon, in case you want an idea of what that looks like. But yeah, so Verticube is a Minecraft type game. You can like walk around and there are messages here that tell you stuff, but you know how it goes. Like, who's going to read the instructions, right? So, as it turns out, you can actually like edit the level, and then you can place stuff. So let me like look around a little bit, and then I forget the controls of this game. Oh yeah, okay. So I'll just like remove all of these, and then start adding some wood blocks, and then make a hole on the other side, because that's surprising. So, and then if I hit play level now, I can like get in there and run around, jump over there, and hopefully not do this, but I just did it. So, and yeah, we're back. And the interesting network aspect that comes out of this is, well, like by having this UI API and sort of encouraging developers, we've been encouraging developers a lot to be like, you're making games, but can you start trying to make tools so that other people can get to be creative without having to write, code and stuff? And that's sort of the idea of having a UI API over there. But also try to use the post system, which lets you post data from your games back out. And we'll see an example of that just now. So now I can hit post, and then I'm saying like, hey, I made this in Verticube, and then I can submit that. And if we go back to the post thing, you can see I made a level here. I actually made a very similar level right before when I was like, just practicing demoing. But we can open it back up, and anyone else can do that, and then they can try the level that I just made. And so we can challenge each other with things that we made, and just have people that aren't necessarily familiar immediately with programming or something, like start being creators on the platform. And that is something that I'm sort of excited by, is like, can we start having this sort of layered ecosystem of there are primary producers that are making, are writing hardcore code and like making all of this like cool graphic stuff. But then because the API makes it very easy to do certain things that actually game developers traditionally find hard, such as provisioning a database or something. Like these APIs, just with one line of code, you can like post something into Castle's database and then create an artifact that someone else can load, right? And so you don't have to like figure all of that out because we've got it set up for you. And then you can just focus on making your game. And so that's the primary producer. And then someone else can make levels on it, and then that's sort of secondary content. And then you'll have yet another level, like people, saying they liked something or commenting on something. So you have this like sort of ecosystem of value flows, and that's the hope. So you can see that with this game already, and there have been a bunch of posts with usually moments in games, but some of these games are creative and you can make stuff. So this one's very interesting. It's by the same author as that 3D game. They've been doing a lot of 3D stuff. And this one's called Reiter. Let me see if it works fine. Oh yeah, it does. So this is actually like, it uses like shader code to make like weird graphics on the screen. And it actually has the code in this text box over here with no syntax highlighting. So let me see if I can figure out how to change the color over here. Yeah, maybe this is it. So if I make that, yeah, I'm just trying to make it blue. All right, so yeah, and then you can like live change shaders in this application and see the results. And this is like sort of an intense application of that user interface API. But moving on, the next platform aspect that exists on Castle right now is you can actually link from game to game, sort of like the web. You can load a different game that an author made on Castle and also add parameters. So say you were playing a game and then you unlocked something with a key, and then it says, oh, you just found this thing, like I want to throw you into this other game my friend made, but now you have this key so you can like do cool stuff. Something like that, right? So just the beginning of that exploration has been this collection of games that an author has made on it, where you can enter one of the games, right? And then at the end of it, the game takes you to another game that you can, and then you just get on this like sequence of fun, right? So here's the first one. It's called Tangle, and it's sort of like DDR but with ropes. And whoops. And what makes it tricky is if there wasn't a tangle and then you like try to untangle it, you actually tangle it up, and you just have to like sort of go through this. And once you get all the way to the end, it gives you all of these games give you grades for like how well you did, and so you get sort of on this like track of I just want to do good and just keep going. Let me see. All right, there we are. And yeah, it's a bunch of fun like shaky effects and whatnot. And then now if I hit start or E or whatever, you can actually, it does have a controller API, so you can attach like a game controller and use an Xbox controller if you want. We can go on to the next game. And these are 4 games that are also on Castle, right? And I'm going to try, so Jess really wanted me to do Rocky Fishing next, but it didn't suggest Rocky Fishing, so I'm going to have to play maybe Bar Invaders. This is sort of this is a very interesting theme for this game, but I guess we're just like shooting out drinks to people that are very thirsty. Whoops, did not get there. And then I want to see if I can get to Rocky Fishing after this one, due to special request. If I make it all the way out of this crowd. So what's interesting about this is actually there were 2 authors involved in these games. One of them created a framework that helps with all of these graphics effects. It's funny, we actually need graphics like special shaders and stuff these days to make games that look low resolution, because we have a high resolution screen and then you want to like make it look pixely and stuff. So he made a framework that makes everything look lower res, right? And then people have been using it because there's a ton of nostalgia and fun, and also just like creative constraint in subjecting yourself to those kinds of constraints, because then you don't have to make out of a ton of choices. You're just like, okay, let's just go with these colors. So it has a palette which reduces the amount of colors you can put on screen and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, rank C+, maybe that's fine. And then you can go on to the next one. So unfortunately, it looks like Rocky Fishing is just not going to be suggested. So but here you can see a network sort of forming, and this is this author's take on what the network means to them, right? Like we didn't push them to do something like that, but we were like, here, there's just ways to link from game to game. It could be that you could make a game that's like an RPG, it's sort of like Zelda or something, but then when you enter a house, it's actually a game made by someone else. So you can do like a ton of interesting stuff. Anyway, so from here on, it gets like sort of less necessarily gamey and more sort of just creative space-like, which is really what I'm hoping to see people do more of on Castle and like make it like a special place. Someone made this thing called Palace, which is a little bit similar to Reddit's r/place, if you guys have seen that. It's just this huge shared canvas, but I'll just find it. It's this shared canvas where you can put 1 pixel down every 3 minutes, and there's this like global countdown counter. And I also get to show off the color picker widget that we have here. Oh, it's getting truncated? Yeah, here, I'll just make it smaller. OK, cool. So yeah, there's this a color picker in the UI API, and then we can pick a color. Actually, let's pick something more obvious. Maybe I'll take this very bright red. And then, OK, the countdown's at 0, so we can leave a pixel now. And I'm going to put one here. And so that pixel got added to the shared canvas, and then Jason, was that you? OK, cool. So yeah, Jason just added like a blue pixel over here. But actually, you can see who did it too if you hover over the pixels. Yeah, it says Skazers, which is Jason's internet handle, and that's me, Nikki, over there. And yeah, people have just put stuff down. So this one is by Trasvold, which is another user on Castle. So someone just decided, oh, there's this like storage API. I'm just going to use that to store a canvas of a bunch of pixels. And the APIs are really simple. Like it's if you go to the docs, we have a website, by the way, and you can check out the API. And like the storage API, for example, is just like you set a key to a value, and then it just does that, but only for your game. So it's like scoped. And then you can also have like user scoped storage and global storage. And like this is traditionally stuff that if you're a person that mostly dove into graphics and game development as a way of getting into like programming, you haven't necessarily done a bunch of. And then, if you did a bunch of single player games and now you're like, actually, I want shared stuff, it turns out you have to like learn this entire other vertical of like making a server and all of that. And it was really cool to see people like Trasvold, and in this case, ByteStats, like do things like this, which they really hadn't done that much before. And it was just like this API, but just existing. They were like, what if I just introduce that? And now they like have this network aspect to their game where people are interacting and different people are drawing different parts of like this one drawing, right? So that's like pretty fun. And the sort of more cutting edge stuff right now on what's happening on Castle is the code editor stuff that I was showing you guys earlier. I have a little bit of a demo of this where I actually used the code editor widget to create like a live edit screen. So over here, this is a white circle that's on the screen. So I don't know if is this text like visible to you all? I don't know if it is. Probably not, right? All right. Well, I don't think we have like a zoom feature on this UI yet. So you might have to just like sort of trust me on this on the fact that we're writing stuff there that makes this do that. But here, I'll do something very simple for now. So the API here is this thing called Love2D, actually. And that's love2d.org. It's a Lua game engine that I've embedded into this client. And then we've started adding more and more extensions to it that let it do all of this network stuff. And I can do like set color to 100. And that's red. And that's why you see this circle being red right now. And this part of the code it's saying that let's have a slider, and then that affects the radius variable, which I use down here while drawing the circle. And so like you have this UI control that you can use to resize a circle, right? So let's try something out. Like let's try taking that color and then like introducing a color picker for it, right? So what I'll do is I'll have like variables for RGBA components of the color. You can also just have one table with all of the components. It's just up to you. I'll start off with red, and then use these variables, which right now is red, so it's going to be the same. But if I change that to like yellow, it's yellow, right? So I'm gonna gonna add in a color picker widget over here, and you can see how quick it is to do that. It's actually using this like sort of immediate mode UI paradigm, which is nice for when you're integrating a user interface with games. So it sort of has this paradigm of your UI code is actually being run like about at 20 hertz, and then it takes the results of that and like sees if there's like some differences to put in the UI or not. Anyway, that makes it so it's very easy to add UI elements like this. So now I can just choose a different color, and you'll see it update in real time. And that was the thing that we just coded, like just now in the application. And then I can do a bunch of stuff, fun stuff like get the current time, and then use like maybe use like sine of time times like 20 or something for the radius. Actually, I might have done that wrong. Let me see what I did. Oh yeah, it's in a timer API. But yeah, so you have this like oscillating radius circle. Can make it a little bit bigger, I guess, or we can use the radius value there. But yeah, and essentially like the idea has been to not create one specific development environment for games necessarily, but provide current game developers the tools to let them build development environments for themselves and other people, and then like that way we have this like on-platform evolutionary design of tools rather than just like picking one, right? Which like, because like right now it seems pretty hard to understand what is the sort of end-all be-all of ways that people want to create. But it might be that each person individually creates some niche of creative tools, and then the union of all of these like partitioning, it's not necessarily a clear partition, but like of niches that people fall into is actually like one big ecosystem where everybody shares everything, instead of there being like one exact tool for like what everybody needs to do, right? And so it's been this like really fun balance of like, do we go all the way and just define what the creator UI is, or do we like make the widgets really easy? And this is the balance that we're trying out right now, and it's actually seeming to work pretty well. So the last example I'll show is actually, so that code editor was made by me in this case, but one of the authors has just started diving into using UI elements to start creating their own creative worlds. And they're calling it, whoops, this is actually not the project. They're calling it, just game editor for their collection of games world, and it's actually quitted. All right, here we go. Yeah, so try to make it as big as possible while still fitting in here. It turns out the screen is actually a little bit cropped, so I can't just maximize. All right, so what they expect you to do in your code actually is, instead of drawing out a bunch of sprites, they expect you to use the sprites that they've already included with their framework. And there's a bit of like a philosophy over here, but the idea is, so you can open the documentation, and the idea is, I'll just let you read it in the author's own words, but it limits what's available to you to provide a simpler environment for you to make in, and so you don't have to worry about a bunch of stuff. And it's pretty funny because they're like, okay, castle's like standard library functions are also not allowed in my game editor. It's just like this creator just wants to do their own world, and so they have this like little world where they have a bunch of other functions that they use to develop. But it's a list of like alternative drawing functions. So it's still sort of in this concept of constraints breed creativity type thing. But it's sort of a similar idea where you choose like which function you want to edit. You can edit the update function or the draw function. And then I just started playing around with their thing like yesterday. But I think what I'll do is like just hit play. And then you can see this is reminiscent of the other games that they made, because they want to sort of get the game that you make into their network of interconnected games. But if I run it right now, and I move the cursor around, it's actually like leaves this trail because the game isn't clearing the screen every time it draws. And I actually need to like write clear the screen to 0 in the draw function. But then once I do that, like it does that. That was, I think their decision was to allow games that paint the screen and therefore not have to clear the screen all the time. And I'll do a similar demo to the one I did before where I just draw circles. So, all right, circ. So there we go. And yeah, this author really likes short and small function names. So let's put a circle over here at 2020 with radius 5, and there we go. So same kind of stuff. And this framework was actually the one that this author used to make a bunch of those other games in this network that we tried earlier, which includes like the Tangle game and the Rocky Fishing game that we never got to. And given that they used that library for this game, it sort of tells you like, if you start playing this game and you're like, wait, I want to make a bunch of other games like this author, and then you go visit that author's page and they explain to you, hey, you can use my tool if you want to do stuff in my style. Like the hope is that gets this like network effect of creation going. And yeah, that's actually like all of the stuff that I wanted to show you guys right now. It's mostly like a technology demo, and it's still sort of in the place where it's probably going to need a little bit of imagination to think about like where all this can go. But that's what we're trying to do. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Like if you want to come here and play a game or something. Like yeah.
So just to
Yeah.
So after having been wowed by like all those games, could you just like close the loop in terms of like what's the strongest narrative link between Expo and Castle? Like how does one evolve from the other, or how do they co-evolve?
Yeah, so what happened was I actually worked on, historically I've been always interested in like doing games and graphic stuff, and then after making games over time I started getting interested in like developer tools, and then that's why I joined Expo to work on developer tools. And while I was there I was like, well, I really like games and graphics, so like we should add a graphics library in here. And I actually worked on the GL view in Expo and stuff. And then over time, I found that for mobile games, actually, like it was pretty hard to get really good performance out of the JavaScript engine that React Native is using. And I started exploring some alternative technologies for that. And actually, Love2D was one of those. And it sort of like piled up into this other project at that point, because a lot of the ideas of, hey, maybe that network or platform vision that we wanted with Expo that we weren't really able to get to as much, like, can we do that here? Especially because the content makes a lot of sense for it. Like, if you think about apps, right? The hope is that once people get your app, they have that app for a while, and so there's like, you would hope there's less churn in like what apps people are using. But games are sort of more of this like Netflix style content where it's like you're churning through many pieces of content, maybe, right? And so the idea is like, oh, okay, like developers are actually like, there's like aligned incentive there in terms of churn, because you want them to like keep using your episodic content and stuff, right? So it like made sense for it to be this like thing. Yeah, and that's basically the story. And it made sense to a lot of people and they started working on it, so yeah. Also, just fun fact, as it turns out, there's a widget that you can use in Expo or React Native apps that play these games. And that's actually how the mobile phone prototype works. So it sort of all comes back together, I guess. But yeah. Awesome.